minutes. Kim, do we have any public comments?
No public comments.
Okay, moving to public hearing and final reading for consideration of amendments to the Town of Bluffton Code of Ordinance, Chapter 23, Unified Development Ordinance, Article 5, Design Standards, Section 5.3, Natural Resources, Tree Conservation, Planning and Landscaping, specific to Section 5.3.3, Tree Conservation, Section 5.3.7, specific landscaping standards in Section 5.3.8, fee in lieu of tree replacement and/or landscaping. Public hearing and final reading. I will now open public hearing. First call for public hearing. Second call for public hearing. Public hearing is closed.
Okay.
You're up. I know you're not Kevin, but I'd rather
No, I'm not Kevin. So I won't go through the whole presentation unless you have questions or want me to, but I will say that this is second and final reading. No changes to the actual UDO amendments themselves have been made. You had asked for staff to just give an example of some of the trees, what those trees would be, and kind of how that fee in lieu would work. So I'll kind of go through, fast forward a little bit, but it is on the screen there, just some background of how we got here and what the actual amendments do state. Going through here, what we've done, and this lists out that replacement trees, and it is, a math game of how much you take out, what you need to replace, and how big it is. So, and the goal is always to retain as many trees on site as you possibly can, and if you can't, then that you replace them on site. The bigger trees, the better. They count, so you can, for example, plant 2 larger trees instead of 5 trees, and I'll go through the example here. And again, this is that example where I told you that larger caliper inch trees, so they're measured at, I think, 6 to 12 inches from the ground, and that's the standard landscape measurements that's used. So if you plant 4-inch caliper trees, they count as 2 trees. Like 1 4-inch counts as 2.5. And then if you plant an even bigger tree, a 6-inch tree, that counts as 3 smaller trees. So,
question right here. You say a 4-inch caliber tree would count as 2 replacement trees, but what size are those?
2.5 inches.
The replacement trees are supposed to be 2.5.
That's the minimum, yes. That's the minimum replacement size that you can use.
Thank you.
And like I said, I have an example that goes through here. The other option that we have in the amendments that was approved on first reading and then revised first reading is that if you can't meet that minimum tree replacement, that you can pay in a fee in lieu of. So, and that would be used for a bank of funds that would be used to purchase and install trees on public property, in our parks, in our right-of-ways, wherever that may be. And we're going to continue to go through the process of what that would look like, that reforestation plan that's in their strategic plan. So really map that out, and that would become partnered with this. But again, the goal is always to replace on site. And again, this is not something that is an automatic, so you can't, as an applicant, simply to say, instead of planting the trees, I'd like to pay into the tree fund. It's still approved by town staff, ultimately by me as the UDO administrator. And again, that's once you've exhausted all other options. And then 2, it could be partial. It could be you need to plant 5 trees, you can't plant 5, but can you plant 4? If you can't plant 4, can you plant 3 and then supplement? So again, the goal is to always retain if you can. If you can't retain, replace on site or do a mix of replacement and fee.
Those requirements, Heather, are due before a CO is issued? Or
that is before
when?
Your development plan is approved. So we need to know on the plan what you're going to plant. So you'll see in a minute here what that tree removal plan looks like. So they'll show the trees that are being removed with an X. The ones that are staying will show up, and then there'll be a landscape plan that shows how you're going to meet those requirements. And so you may not be able to meet you may have to remove a tree because it's in a parking spot or it's in the building footprint. But as you go through the review process, and which is reviewed by town staff as well as planning commission, you may see that if you shift where that parking spot is, maybe it's now in a landscape median. So we work through the process of that, but the plan itself has to be approved and is submitted and approved by staff and Planning Commission prior to your final development plan. And then the trees have to be installed prior to your certificate of construction compliance, or you can bond some things. This, you had asked about, council had asked about what types of trees and what's allowed for that mitigation, and it's native hardwoods. And really that is your oaks, cypress, elms, and magnolias. So you, for instance, you can't use palm trees as your mitigation trees. You can use them in your landscape plan, and that's certainly something that we would not say no to. However, it would not meet your replacement tree requirements. And again, that is at that 2.5-inch minimum caliper, and that's also 12 feet tall, so you can't plant.
So for just clearness, if you take down a live oak, are you required to plant back a live oak?
No, just a hardwood tree. The preference would be a live oak, but it depends what the site conditions are as far as what else is on the site, what can accommodate. We would always encourage live oak. That's kind of the hierarchy of the protected native trees, but it could be a hardwood, any one of the native hardwood trees.
Question. Why not a palm tree?
Because that's not considered a native hardwood to meet that same tree replacement, because the goal is to, if you're removing a live oak or a hardwood, that you replace it with a hardwood. Palm trees are different as far as protected trees. That's not considered a required tree. But it's something that's used in your buffer and your landscape plan. It's just not counted that same way. And again, it's because of canopy coverage and things like that that are in the ordinance right now. This here, just wanted to give some clarification over, since we've been going through these UDO amendments, we've been talking about DBH, caliper inch, circumference. This just kind of gives a visual of how we measure that and what's used as far as what that caliper, like a caliper tree, DBH, and what that's used. And again, that caliper size, like I'm talking about, that 2.5 inches, 12 feet in height, that is the measurement that's taken, about a foot off the ground in the base of the ground there. So this is that example that I was telling you about. So during the development plan review process, this is what we would see. This is actually an application that is currently under review. So if you went to our permit finder map, you could click on this and dive deeper and actually see some of these plans. Not necessarily these examples, because we've come up with some different scenarios, but this is where you'll see all the trees that are being removed with that X. This area table shows that it's a little bit over 1 acre, so it does trigger that 15 trees required per acre. So here's an example of what would be required if this layout were approved. Again, this is just in the review stage, conceptual. There may be some things that they can do to that parking to rework that and get all the trees planted. But their total trees that would be required is 24 on site. This plan shows 19 trees planted, so they would have to mitigate for 5. So that could be paying in the tree mitigation bank, or it could be a combination that I'll go through. So here's one scenario, again, that they figure out with staff and planning commission a way to plant those trees. Those green dots there are some suggestions that staff has initially, like here's where you could plant those trees. You'll notice that it's not within the required buffer. That was one thing that was discussed through the process, is that the buffers are the buffers, the mitigation trees throughout the site. So those green dots are just some initial suggestions. Once we walk the site and go through it, it may not be conducive for that, but this is something that we would at least start with. Can you plant those 5 extra trees that you're showing missing? Here's a suggestion. If they do that, they meet the tree mitigation requirements, no fees required. Another scenario, like I said, you can swap out and plant some bigger trees instead of the 5. So then you could do a combination. You plant 1 4-inch caliper, that would equal 2 trees. 1 6-inch caliper, that would equal 3 trees. And there you go, again, no fees required. So there's there's never a one-size-fits-all. Each site's different, and there's certainly up to the developer, the business owner. There's different combinations of what you can do to meet those requirements. And then the other option is there's nowhere else to plant trees. Maybe there's already a lot of canopy, whatever the grade changes, whatever the case may be. And we've worked through all of the options and said, okay, it truly is not possible to plant these trees on site. So we're going to pay for the tree mitigation. Again, this is something staff would review. What they're required to do is the ordinance says that it is at market rate plus installation and maintenance of the tree. So what we would do procedurally is go through and get 3 quotes similar to our procurement policy. A live oak, what does it cost? What's the average from a nursery? And then it would be 125%. So that 25% additional than the standard cost of the tree would be to administer the account, to the logistics of ordering the tree, obtaining the tree, finding a place to plant it, maintaining it, and moving forward. So this is an example just on market rate, live oak, that would meet that 2.5-inch, 12-foot high requirement, $900 to $1,600. Again, we would look at what's the average, 3 different quotes, and also look to our public services who do this and what would it cost us to make sure that it's reasonable. And again, it's something that would have to be approved by the town before we move forward. And then that bank would be used, again, to plant trees in our new parks, rights of way, or wherever the plan is. And that's it for the examples. Again, we do have the criteria that we go through when we go through the amendments. We did find that it met it all. Planning Commission did recommend approval. The one vote against was just to make some clarifications, which were done. And with that, if there's no other questions, I do have the motion. And if this is approved this evening, then it would go into effect for all new applications submitted as of tomorrow.
Any questions, discussion? Is there a motion?
So moved.
You gotta read it. You want to make the motion, read the motion?
I am. If it comes to tree protection, I'm all for it.
Okay. Oh, you want me to read it? Would you move to recommend the amendments to the Town of Bluffton Code of Ordinance, Chapter 23, Unified Development Ordinance, Article 5, Design Standards, Section 5.3, Natural Resources, Tree Conservation, Planning and Landscaping, specific to Section 5.3.3, Tree Conservation, Section 5.3.7, specific landscaping standards, in Section 5.3.8, fee in lieu of tree replacement and or specific landscaping. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
Is there a second? We need to get Dan to vote on this or anything, or are you, Kim?
If they're in favor, just their silence tells us they're in favor.
Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
That's unanimous. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Moving on to workshop agendas. The workshop agenda items. We have MKSK Consulting Team here to present Blueprint Bluffton Comprehensive Plan Update.
I will just go ahead and introduce. Yes, we have Andrew with MKSK to introduce it, as well as his colleague Kyle. Yeah. I was like, oh, make sure I got that right, to go through their presentation, and I'm sure they would tell you, stop them if you have any questions. We have to interact as productive as possible.
Thank you.
Good evening,
Welcome.
everyone. Thank you. Yeah, good to be here. Let's see here if I can make this a little bigger.
You need to set stuff down.
I won't mess with it. I won't mess with it. How about I just don't mess with it? Again, Andrew Overbeck with MKSK with me tonight, Kyle May. So we're looking forward to sort of giving you an update on where we are in the process here. We know you all have been working on your strategic plan. I think a lot of things that you all have just finished in that process are really in lockstep with what we've heard from the community in terms of the comprehensive plan. So that's, it's great to be able to sit here at the same time, you all wrapping that up, to be able to, after tonight, we'll be sort of drafting the plan and moving ahead with documentation. And there's a lot of things you all are already thinking about that are sort of dovetailing perfectly with what we've heard from the community in this comprehensive planning effort. So we'll be sort of referencing back and forth between those two documents. Really fantastic that work's been completed. So we use that as a starting point when we began this work about 18 months ago. It's great to see that's been updated as well. So we'll give you an update on the process tonight, walk you through the plan framework, all the stuff you saw out there in the hallway. We'll have some chance to conversate and talk about next steps. So if there's anything along the way, interrupt. We can make this very interactive and conversational tonight with you all. So we're really at the end of this task of the visioning and policy direction. What we're here to talk about tonight are sort of those high-level goals, objectives, and action statements, and we'd love to get your feedback and input on that direction. We're going to move after tonight into that plan documentation phase, and as you all sort of laid out in your strategic plan, we have Plan Commission and then coming back to you for first and second reading here this summer. So that's what we'll be up to next. Backing up to the purpose of the plan, we're looking to look out the next 10-year period of time. Again, supporting the town's vision, both what's been articulated to us by the community, but also what's in your strategic plan document. Looking for ways to have that balanced approach to evolving as a community, but also honoring the history and culture that's here. We've had good engagement both in person and online, although 2 weeks ago we were here to do a community workshop. We were forced by the tornadoes to do that online at the last minute. I think Kyle and I might have been alone here in Town Hall, but we were in a safe place, interior room. So
They said it was safe.
They said it was safe.
We trust you.
Yeah.
Ben,
Yeah.
you still here?
We're still here. We made it back. But over 750 people have watched that presentation, and we're going to continue to push the word out. We've got stuff that's available online, but we're also going to create some paper copies of that can be taken out to community members that might feel more comfortable doing things on paper. So we'll be working to continue to get that feedback as we do our documentation here. But the goal will be, and I think what you'll start to see here tonight, is a highly visual, understandable, clear planning document to leave you all with as you look ahead to the next 10 years of planning and evolving here in Bluffton. There's 10 required elements from the state of South Carolina. I've talked to some of you out in the hallway. Resilience is a new category. I think that's something that's always been embedded in different sections in your comprehensive planning. Now it's a standalone section. You see out there in the hallway, it took up two of the boards. It's a pretty weighty section. But we've had a lot of great input on that. And then again, looking at your strategic plan and lining that up with this effort as well. So those are things that we're putting into this work together. I think as we look ahead, these are population forecasts using sort of best available information from the county and elsewhere. It's not a foregone conclusion that this growth trajectory continues, but we know the community has evolved from where we were in 2000 to where we are today. There will be continued growth. What does that look like? Again, it's a reason to continue to look forward as a community. And then you can see here, from 1 square mile to 54 square miles, but we're also looking at the areas sort of around Bluffton as well. So you see the study area here is a little bit larger than the town boundaries. And again, those areas of influence and making sure that we take those into account are extremely important. As we realize there's things happening to us regionally that we need to have influence on. So one of the things we're going to talk about this evening are things that the town controls, the town can have action on, but there's also things where the town needs to partner with, whether that's existing people in the community that can play a role in implementing some of this, and or other jurisdictions that we need to advocate and be at the table and help make those right decisions. So you'll see that sort of those are two major places of influence and impact. Community engagement, we're well over 700 voices now with the engagement we've had, and we'll continue again to work on that. We've done that both in person and online. We did community roundtables. We have a great steering committee, almost 20 folks that have guided us throughout the process. We did a last workshop with them back in February, and then followed up with them in early March with some ongoing conversations. We've probably, in the last couple of weeks, met with them for about 4 or 5 hours to go through all this material and get their feedback and input. And they've been a fantastic sounding board for this work and represent a broad cross-section of the community. A couple of things I wanted to just sort of pull your attention to. The things that make Bluffton special, I think we all know. It's the people, the small town feel, the natural environment, the historic environment, the culture, but then the people that are here. And Old Town, I think represents all of what, people envision or think of when they think of a vision of Bluffton. How do we then continue to have that feeling throughout the 54 square miles is kind of something that's been asked of us. And I think when you look at the concerns people have, it's about those other things that people talk about in planning processes, growth, development, traffic. What does Bluffton look like going forward? How do people that move here understand sort of what came before them? Affordable housing, obviously been on your list of concerns as well. How do we keep up? How do we sort of keep pace with the growth that's happened and make sure that we're addressing community needs going forward? So those are some of the things that sort of are emblematic of the direction we need to go in. And I think I'll end here with this section of our conversation tonight with these engagement themes. I think as you all have noted in your strategic planning process, the need for affordable housing options, a key concern. I would attach that to needing to be a place where there's a life cycle community. We'll talk a little bit about this in the housing piece, where we need to have a broad section of cross-section of housing. So that's something people were concerned about. The natural areas, May River, the natural beauty, preserving and expanding that. Understanding that there are regional issues that we need to be partnering on, and how do we then connect things together? I think that's another key piece of this work is some of those interjurisdictional connections, but then how do we get from one place to another and what's that impact on Bluffton? And then a couple other pieces I think are worth pointing out, the more diverse economy. You all sort of talked about that a little bit in the most recent strategic plan. What does that look like going forward? How do we attract knowledge workers and those types of firms are going to diversify the sort of employment base here in Bluffton? So all these things are sort of go together and help us take that community conversation and turn that into the action items that we'll go through here this evening. Any comments at this point, or shall I have Kyle continue?
I'm good.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for this opportunity. My name's Kyle May. I work along with Andrew and our team. Just been very excited to get to know you all and focus on you all and study you at length. Where we are in the process right now, as Andrew alluded to, is trying to pull a lot of pieces together. The boards out front, the work that we've done online and with the community so far, we've heard a lot, I think, in this. And where we are in the process at this point is trying to define this product. And what I want to present to you here with the balance of our time together this evening is our kind of an initial approach to organizing some of the how, right? We've learned a lot about the why we're acting in some of these areas, but how are we going to act? What are the actions, the objectives? What are we saying as a community in each of these sections? Andrew made the point that we've got 9. We haven't come up with the right term for this. And maybe it's the wheel or the compass. I'm not sure, but we've got 9 of these topics that we've put a lot of thought and time and analysis into, and asked the community their perspective on as well. Ranging from economic prosperity, housing, cultural resources, and as Andrew mentioned, 2 of these new ones, resiliency and people. But I think what you'll notice with those 2 additions is that if you think about this like a Venn diagram, the resiliency piece is mirrored in a lot of these topics. It carries over into land use, into housing, economics as well. We like to approach this work, I think we as a profession, as a philosophy with planning, we begin with trying to build consensus. Every one of your communities is unique. There's a lot of different backgrounds for folks that find themselves in this community, but we're trying to find through this work some base reason why folks are here and what they see for the future in terms of quality of life, quality of place. We organize that around a set of goals. So for each of our 9 topics, we've got a desired outcome expressed simply that we've identified. We continue to test, but we've identified. It's very important for us within each of those goals that we've got a measurable set of outcomes. So the objectives are a way of drilling in just a little bit on, well, what does that mean really in the Bluffton context? And then third, but perhaps most importantly, and some of the work that you all have done quite recently, we've got to identify things to do, right? It's not enough to just have this kind of platitudes or high-level statements. We really need projects, policies, programs that you all can fund, implement, track over time to say, hey, we're headed in the right direction. We can evaluate that, and that's really critical. So I set that all up just to say that with the rest of the presentation, you're going to see a kind of rhythm to this. And then for the work outside, and also what we shared with you last week in advance of today's meeting, we do have a draft 1.0 action agenda that I'll allude to as we move through. I want to start with people in the fact that this was a really critical topic for us. You know, so much of what we do, sometimes it gets lost as to why you're doing this work, right? We're doing it for the communities that are here. We heard a lot, about that community as we engaged throughout the work. The fact that folks love being here, it's Bluffton. I mean, we get that. But also that they're very connected to their neighbors, to their network, to their congregation, whatever it might be. And as we can think about serving that community, it was important for us to understand who that is, who that community is, how it's changing. You may know, you may not. You're a relatively young community. We think about overall age. Lots of kids here compared to the region. Also, very well educated. But we also know it's not wholly homogenous, right? There is diversity, plenty of diversity in this community, and actually that changes every year. Whether we think about just with the confines of Bluffton or the larger planning area or indeed the region, there's a lot of dynamic elements that are feeding into change around the Low Country. We think about the goal here, serving the needs of a diverse population, and I won't labor you with every single one of these objectives. I'm just going to pick on one in each chapter I think were particularly interesting to us. And within this one, we talk a lot about the idea of provision of human and social services in the community. I think what we heard a lot within our work, and I hope you see reflected in some of the early actions, it's about collecting, enhancing, lifting up, whether those programs are within government or without, folks that are doing great work. This is a hard chapter, I think, for communities to get right because there are so many actors in the play, you know what I mean? And not all of them are within this room. So as we think about this is a great example of what Andrew mentioned here when we think about influencing, supporting, even incentivizing folks that may not be you all, but are doing great work on your behalf in this area. The idea here also, too, is finding ways to come together, bringing this community together. That was really important to commenters throughout all. We can't do any of this work. Please interrupt me if you have any questions. We can't do any of this work without a strong and cycling local economy. We talk about cultivating a strong local economy, but you could also use the word, I think, diversity here as we grow. A key thing that was underlined from our leadership, especially from staff and from stakeholders, quite frankly, is the need to every year add just a little bit more to what's going on within our community. Adding things, though, that make sense within our community. One number to point out there, we see that $321 million, we call that retail leakage, meaning money that could be spent in Bluffton but it's being spent elsewhere. We don't point that out to say that you need to have every one of those dollars spent in this community, right? Because some of that money might be spent at a car dealership or at Costco or things you might not want here, right? But the idea is that's an opportunity for you all, right? There's a segment of that you could be tapping into and using to your advantage. The other thing I'll point out here when we think about your community, and not dissimilar to any of the places here around the region, is this inflow-outflow. A lot of folks that work here, actually most of the folks that work here don't live here. Most of the folks that live here don't work here, right? And that creates a churn, a dynamic that plays into our mobility chapter, plays into housing, also plays into workforce and labor needs in and around this region. We've got 5 objectives we identified for this chapter, and I'll really underline this one, this idea of E3, diversifying the town's tax base. And this is in pursuit of fiscal resiliency, fiscal sustainability, every year becoming more secure. And that's not just about sales tax receipts, it's also about opportunities for locals, right? This is about skill development, workforce, not just retail, but all pursuits within this orange chapter. We did hear a lot, of course, about housing, and we're really happy to see a lot of alignment between the work you all have done within the strategic plan and our own work around this need to diversify housing options. And I should say and start here by just saying you're not alone, I think, in the fact that you have a housing product mix that's very lean towards single-family detached housing. It's pretty common, around the country, quite frankly, and around the region as well. We see in here is the idea of, is there opportunity to create a life cycle of housing product? Meaning for your children, where could they enter, this mix? For you, as you may retire, can you stay in Bluffton? This idea of diversity is not just for new residents, but it's also for folks that are here and would love to stay here, and their children as well. Within these three, we have a number that taken. You'll see on the boards also several actions that address this. One I'll quickly point out here, an acronym we've been using a lot recently is this idea of NOAA, or naturally occurring affordable housing. As we've worked, on this challenge in many different types of communities around the country, sometimes the thing that gets ignored is that product you've already got in place. When we think about affordability, how do we actually maintain and bring our naturally occurring affordable housing that's already in Bluffton today into the next generation? It's a critical thing that a lot of communities ignore, but it's a lot easier to protect that house or maintain it to the next generation than it is to go build one brand new at an affordable level. So something that we've brought into this conversation and identified some actions for you all as well. Resiliency, as I mentioned, it's brand new. It's really heavy. It's got two boards out front. There was a lot of things folks mentioned here. Remember, resiliency could define a number of ways. We really, from our leadership, took the direction of thinking about environmental resiliency. Economic resiliency is well covered within that economic orange chapter. 5 things that we lifted up within this section that we found were quite important to the community. And one of those is a repeat. I apologize. R2, R3, I'll correct that. But with R5, an interesting thing that's begun to emerge just over the last decade that we've all been working at this is the idea of macro renewable energy production, but also micro. A lot of communities have been caught flat-footed in the proliferation of, especially of solar panel installation, as that's occurred. So we've looked a lot into that within R5 and understand how that it could proliferate here in your community as well. And last section I'll present, I'll turn it back over to Andrew here, has to do with celebrating people in history, acknowledging how we got to this moment in time. There was a lot of stories we collected throughout this, both about your deep history, but also about your more recent history. I think sometimes when we have this conversation, what gets lost is, how much change, how fast that's occurred in this region, right? Andrew showed the sign going from 1 square mile to 54 in 40 years, right? That's a significant transition. As we think about bringing folks along, continuing to promote your arts and your base culture in an authentic way, that takes maintenance. And as we think about this chapter, a lot of what you'll see is opportunities to bring community together, to acknowledge some of the unique things that are in and around this community, starting with Old Town, but not just exclusively there, your neighborhoods, your communities that predate even some of the annexation that's occurred. So telling the story here is really all part of the thrust within this chapter. And I think this is my last section here. I'll go quickly. Balanced Bluffton, we think about doing, comprehensive planning. Really the core of why we do this is to address land use development, redevelopment, and conservation concerns. When we talk about that control or influence dichotomy that Andrew brought up, this is really an area where as a town you have a lot of say-so, right? And we think about the way communities develop and grow over time and quite frankly evolve. This is a section in a space where we want to spend a lot of time because you inherit these decisions and your community does as well. We look at land use. We look at the character of development. We interview folks that are in this game every day, try to understand what they're seeing. We look at the market overall. Are there segments, are there products that are missing here? We talked about housing, but also within retail, commercial, office, amenities as well.
I think real quick, go ahead. That's fine, Kyle.
One of the things that we've done in this work is, look at your zoning map, and a lot of it was labeled PUD, right? So we went inside those PUDs and pulled out what actual land uses are there. So that's something we'll leave you with, but I think gives you a really better understanding of what uses you really have. So that analysis alone, I think, will help you all sort of better understand what you have. And then as we, start to think about it again, this was in your strategic plan, is how do you attract people to place? And so how do we turn some of these things that are nodes of activity into places, which is really the key part of this growth framework.
Yeah, and at the heart of this, this is really the crux of our exercise here. I think it's the future vision for some of these crossroads. And in a lot of ways, you've got a great example right here, which is pretty unique in this country of what a vibrant core looks like, what a contributing neighborhood looks like. What we're doing in this process, we've been asked to do, is think about that at multiple scales. So if we know what a great place looks like in Bluffton, how do we mimic, mirror, expand that to all lengths of the community today and in the future. And remember that this is an evolutionary process, right? None of this is overnight. It's about setting a direction and trying to travel in that way. This future growth areas, we look at this in terms of land use. We've identified one of the next steps that Andrew and I have on our checklist is to really go down in depth and examine these particular focus areas in a lot greater depth, quite frankly, looking at ownership patterns, trying to understand where some of the movable pieces and immovable pieces are, and provide some initial framework for where there may be leverage for the town, or quite frankly, where there may be opportunity for the private sector as well. We've only got 3 objectives here, but because this is so meaty, this really is sticky, and it tracks a lot. And when I say improve here, it's not to say that you aren't doing a great job within this regulatory framework. It's only to say that this is an ongoing activity for all communities. Things change quite rapidly, and the folks that do a great job are the ones that are proactive along the way. So I'll turn it over to Andrew here to talk a little bit about natural resources and the balance of our topics.
Yeah, I think this is another place where we heard a lot from the community and then sort of dug in and looked at did some research on Bluffton. So one of the measures that we look at for a high quality community is the amount of park space that's within a 10-minute walk of a person's house. So when you look at that from the standpoint of publicly available open space, it's 35%, which honestly is sort of toward the middle bottom. But when you look at then what's inside of those PUDs, as we mentioned, we went back and sort of broke out that open space, that gets a little better, right? Gets to almost 80%. But again, that might not all be publicly accessible space. So I think the drive that you all have and the things we heard from the community, and again, looking forward to fiscal year 23-24 in your strategic plan, some improvements to park space, I think is well placed as a priority. Because that was really voiced by the community. So you'll see that that's really the first sort of action step there, and then continuing to improve the spaces that you have. One of the other things we heard a lot about was access to the water. So whether that's personal watercraft or actual power boats of some kind. But again, that's sort of the namesake or the thing that draws people to this place. Improving that access is really important. And then as we look at that sort of land use map, how much of that is ecologically sensitive natural areas that we really ought to be setting aside? And again, you all have taken a start at that. We're going to continue to look at that as well. So the natural resource piece, extraordinarily important, gives us some good direction, and we've heard a lot from the community around that. Connecting residents with destinations, this is another place where it's a little bit about partnerships with others, interjurisdictional partnerships certainly, but there's a few things that the community really was strong about. And I think when we look at the future roadway network and things that are in the county's plan there in terms of their transportation planning that's going on right now, maybe a little bit hard to see here, but you all can probably see it pretty well. Those green dash lines, those connections of the parkway, and then up to 278. Really think it's important to continue to advocate for those. I know those are in the plan, but I think currently unfunded. Again, that's about seat at the table and advocating for those improvements. We look at the community's comments around May River Road and 46, continuing to have that two-lane sort of rural character. Some of that comes down to land use along there, but also about having this multiplicity of connections. So if there's a way to sort of take pressure off of May River Road by making these connections that have long been studied, these aren't things that were in the last transportation plan. They've been in a couple, I think, to this point. We really think it's important to continue to push forward with that at the county level.
Could I ask one question?
Sure.
Just looking at the map, I guess these numbers on here are trips?
Correct. Those are the average daily traffic. Correct. So those are the numbers that that we sort of picked up off of existing data collection. So you can sort of see as you come say over off of 278, you can see where people continue on 278 or maybe take a split down to 46 or Bluffton Parkway. So you see those numbers start to distribute as you
That's kind of what caught my eye was actual numbers on 278
Mm-hmm.
where you got 57,100 going across the bridge, but only 37,300
Yeah, so you can see
where
how
it
that traffic
intersects with
Yeah. Yeah, so you can see how it starts to distribute, and the importance of, I think, continuing to connect Bluffton Parkway is, I think, something we're really strenuous about. You look at what's on May River Road, and again, this isn't taking into account peak traffic, as I'm sure you experienced this weekend with people coming on and off of Hilton Head. That's peak traffic in an epic way. But a two-lane road, and especially a two-lane road with a center turn lane, can take 20 to 25,000 cars a day. So where you are now, if that continues to sort of stay its character, it can handle that traffic load. But again, that multiplicity of connections is really important, and that's something that we've got down as an action item for sure. And I think the other thing that these roadway connections do is start to define that character of place. So you'll see that if we sort of layer together that growth framework, those nodes of activity, a lot of them pop up along these other roadway corridors, and making those connections is really important because they'll start to define the character of those places in as much as anything else does. So another sort of key consideration as we look ahead. The other piece that you all are working on, you've done a great job, and again, probably have to squint your eyes here a little bit as well, but these dotted lines of future multi-use paths, making that decision easy for someone that lives in Bluffton to not be one of those numbers you just saw on the screen, to be able to sort of say, oh, I can, instead of driving a mile or two, I can hop on a bike and safely get to a destination in the community. So again, helping people make that easy decision to take a car off the road and enjoy, getting a little exercise as well. When we talked to high school students, we had a little session with them. It was amazing how they described Bluffton as being a series of destinations that aren't connected. So they'll sort of describe, well, I've got a school zone and a place where I go for fun and a place I might do stuff after school. They definitely don't connect the dots by sort of walking or biking around. It's driving. So the degree to which we can start to connect those dots, and you can see, if we put a map of the schools on here, some of those are sort of isolated in a way as well. So again, making it an easy decision to make a different transportation decision is something that we're focused on. So again, multiplicity of connections we've talked about. A lot of people are driving alone to work. How do we get people maybe out of their cars a little bit, like we've talked about, and then making sure that we advocate and have a seat at the table, because the last point in here is really important, that only 1% of your total roadway miles are ones that you control. So there's state and county level conversations that have to take place. So the active transportation network, incredibly important. We have a little bit in there on public and water transportation. We'll have some pieces on parking and access management. Looking at the regional transportation system, as we've talked about, that multiplicity of connections, and making sort of priority statements there in terms of where do we feel like the town needs to advocate going forward. So this one's really important as we look at that growth trajectory for the future. How's the community continue to evolve? The last piece is about community facilities. Again, this is a fairly limited piece because there's certain things you all have control over. Again, it's a lot about supporting and coordinating at that local level. But two pieces when we know there's been great work on, and again, we saw this in the strategic plan, continue to invest in that utility and infrastructure as it relates to sewer and water. And then again, going back to some of the things we talked about in sustainability, this is a place where there's some overlap. What can you do to reduce waste and litter, and then other sort of environmentally friendly aspects to that as well. So that's a place where there's some strong overlap. So those are the nine sections, and again, we've sort of put all these goals in one place. These really came from all of the conversations that we've had. It's been great to involve a lot of folks and have those words people gave us sort of populate here. It was not hard to take the required sections by the state of South Carolina and put some action to them that really reflect the analysis that we did around the existing conditions and trends that we see, and matching that up with community conversation. It really was easy to sort of connect those dots. So we really feel like we've got some good community direction in this work together. And our next step is really to put those pieces together. So after tonight, we'll be actively starting to write the plan. Again, we're still collecting input. Charlotte and Kevin and their team are going to be making sure that at community events that are coming up this week and next that the word sort of gets out, so taking advantage of some of those opportunities as well. But we really are working hard now to take these words that are on a page and turn them into a document that's very user-friendly and available to you all. So the next time we talk, you'll have had a chance to have that, hold it in your hands, and spend some time with it. So a lot of what we're talking about tonight, there'll be a lot more detail and background on, and you'll see how the pieces fit together. So happy to have further conversation, go back to anything that we missed. I know we distributed a sort of handout or worksheet prior to tonight. If there are any thoughts you want to share with us on that or places that you want to make sure we emphasize and prioritize, we are all ears.
Bridget, anything?
Yeah, if you could go back to the slide where you talked about the feedback on diversity and inclusion. I know you made a statement that it's difficult for communities because there are a lot of key players involved.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, here we go.
That one?
Yeah, so I think we had a couple members of our steering committee that are volunteers or involved in some of those local social service agencies. So I think what we were referring to there was that there's a lot of nonprofits and others that are already sort of in this work and making sure that the recommendations we make sort of dovetail with work that they're doing, and is recognizing that those are really strong partners to work with. So when we come to the end, I think one of the things we didn't talk about tonight, there will be an implementation matrix that sort of lists all of these action items, but then who are the partners? Because it's not, in some of these cases, it's not the town by themselves, it's the town and. So making sure that we've got a full list of who those other service providers or folks in the community that are already engaging in this work, making sure that they're recognized and that partnership continues to exist. So I think that's what we were referring to.
Thank you. I just wanted to emphasize when you get to that portion, or as you're still meeting with stakeholders in that plan, that we are explicit with the term diversity is. Mm-hmm. A lot of times that word gets misused, and the perception of it really becomes convoluted, and it doesn't help us advance or really get any further than where we need to be. So if we could really hone in on that so everyone understands what it is. So if there is a deficiency or deficit in there somewhere, our plan is really addressing it and not just using cliche rhetoric, for lack of a better term. And then my only other concern, when you were talking about multi-access roads, some talking about bike paths, will it include, or has there been discussions on like enhancements of roads like that in terms of as our population increases, it's maybe no longer going to be feasible to just kind of let people be good stewards and like let pedestrians take the lead in cars. Everyone kind of has an understanding. Maybe the plan is going to include something like having actual like crosswalk signs and where it says stop or wait or go, things like that. Just to make sure that we don't run into any fatalities or just issues with pedestrians, especially in that downtown area because it's such a heavy traffic area.
Yeah, completely agree on both counts. And I think Kyle and I were talking about this afternoon. We talk about, there's diversity within the community, diversity of options, diversity of people working on things.
Right.
We want to talk about diverse housing options. So we realize that word, depending on the context, can go all. So you're exactly right about that. So we'll work on that. Thank you. And then as it relates to, I don't know, you want to add anything to that, Kyle?
I was just going to say, I think one of the things you bring up, which is so kind of embedded in the process that we've had, the conversation we've had, is this idea of kind of the maturation of this community, right? Like as we grow up as a place, and these kind of natural moments that we have, along the way. The housing products, kind of the proactive safety measures, I think, within that realm. But quite frankly, when we think about Old Town, I mean, it's kind of a symptom in a lot of ways of your success, the fact that folks want to be here. Folks really want to be in that environment, your residents and your non-residents, right? Folks from Ohio, especially. So I think just acknowledging that and watching the trends as they occur and trying to get ahead, like you just said, ahead of that potential accident, or get ahead of something that may be a negative outcome just generally for the community as well.
Yeah, and to your point about the multi-use paths, where those cross driveways, where they cross intersections, lighting, signage, behavior expectations of both people walking, riding a bike, and driving a car. Everyone needs to know what they're supposed to be doing, and that needs to be as clear as day. So I think we will definitely, put some language to that and benchmark of best practices that we need to be thinking about. That work is extraordinarily important because it's supposed to be safe, not sort of driving people into conflict points.
Thank you.
Got anything? Well, if that's it, Mr. McCracken, you're the only one I see out there that's from the public. Would you like to comment or say anything or add your 2 cents in?
I'll pass. I've been privileged to be able to work with it, but, and see and hear what they're doing, but I'm looking forward to seeing the final plan and it woven all together.
We all are. Okay, well, thank you guys for being here, and if there's not anything else, is there a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
We are done.
Thank you all.